All right, good morning. Welcome to Breaking Point Stalkers Out today. I'm here. Krystal, how you doing?
Doing well so far. How about you, Emily? Always great to have you here.
Doing just about as well as John Bolton on CNN last night, who was proudly announcing that he is going to vote for Dick Cheney in 2024. He did it in 2020. That's a man with principles.
It's a little too on the nose, honestly. To be voting for Dick Cheney in 2024 is really wild.
Like, at least vote for Liz Cheney if you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Like, maybe a more contemporary
upgraded
figure.
Resistance model of warmongering.
Yes,
so, yes.
Anyway,
important things to get to. In addition to John Bolton's voting preferences, we have some inflation numbers that just came in yesterday, hotter than expected. We'll talk about what that means for you and obviously what it may mean for the political landscape as well. There's also another really fascinating story with regard to inflation data. A government agency was caught feeding secret inflation information to, you guessed it, Wall Street, who can benefit to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars from such inside information. We'll break that down for you as well. We've got some new abortion comments from Trump trying to contain the fallout over that new Arizona decision. And we also have some question marks about what exactly is going on in his campaign.
In his mind.
Yes, there's a sort of tale of two campaigns going on here, so we'll break that down for you. Also, turns out Lunchables are even worse for your kids than you may have imagined, which is a problem for me personally because, yes, I do feed my kid Lunchables, though probably not anymore. So we'll break that down for you. Very excited to be joined, honestly honored to be joined by Israeli journalist Gideon Levy today with Haaretz. He's going to break down the very latest that is going on in Gaza, including an Israeli airstrike that killed the sons and grandchildren of Hamas's political leader. Tucker kicked a hornet's nest over Palestinian Christians. We'll bring you those comments and the fallout. Emily and I, of course, will react. Jon Stewart with a great monologue calling out Biden's hypocrisy on Israel versus Russia and human rights. And I'm taking a look at Jonathan Chait's latest piece, which may be his worst yet, which is really saying something. So breaking down this piece where he's going after protesters, saying that they're illiberal and authoritarian. There's a lot to say about that one. So lots to get to this morning.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Yes. All right, so let's start with that inflation data. Let's put the numbers up on the screen so you guys can see. Coming in higher than expected. This is per Heather Long from the Washington Post. She's got some charts there on the screen you can see as well. So she says inflation in March came in at 0.4% for the month. That is an annual rate of 3.5% in the past year. The forecast was for 0.3% and 3.4% respectively, so you can see higher on both of those metrics. She goes on to say that gas and rent accounted for over half of the March increase. Higher gas price and high rent are keeping inflation above 3%. She had another tweet where she broke down the specific increases in a variety of categories that were really noteworthy. And some of these are just extraordinary. So car insurance up 22%. In the past year. I really have no idea what the hell is going on there. Car repair up 12%, baby formula up 10%, veterinarian bills up 10%, rent up 5.9%. Obviously, that really hurts. Electricity up 5%, restaurants up 4.2%, gas up 1.3%, and home health care for the elderly soared 14.2% in the past year. The largest increase that we have ever seen in that category. So you clearly have a number of areas, in particular some that are most near and dear to Americans in terms of their pocketbooks, that continue to spike. Emily, there's a lot of fallout from this. Obviously, the political fallout, we'll get to that in a minute, but it also raises a lot of questions about what the Fed is going to do next. There was, the Fed has stopped increasing interest rates. There was a thought, maybe next time they meet, they may actually cut interest rates. Yeah. That's something that people who especially are looking to buy homes are really hoping for because the mortgage interest rates make home buying even more unaffordable than it would otherwise be. But that is effectively off the table now with this hotter than expected inflation report.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And I think another thing to look at here is that as the Biden administration, I know we're going to get to Biden's comments in just a second, they say inflation is coming down. The juxtaposition of these numbers with that, the important metric to look at is in some of those numbers that Krystal just pointed out, it's not even that the rate of inflation is slowing. And that's what we saw in the top line numbers too. Yeah. And that's what the Biden administration has pointed to in some respects, saying the rate of inflation has slowed year over year, month over month. And that's what's really been able they've been able to use it as somewhat of a tool. That's not what we're looking at here. And that's basically all they have. Whenever they get a number like that, It's basically all they have. But when you're looking at 14% increases in rent or 5.9% increases in rent,
5.9%,
yeah. I mean, that is devastating.
It is.
Devastating. And people feel it, and there's no way you can talk around it.
Yeah, and we know at this point, at the beginning of the inflationary cycle, the idea that corporate profits and basically profiteering was contributing to this was really dismissed as this fringe idea. The further we got along, and that wasn't the only thing that was going on, but that was actually a significant chunk of it, was corporations seeing, and they would admit this on earnings call, hey, we can get away with raising our prices, so of course we're going to raise our prices because we want a higher profit margin. That trend has continued. There have been increased reports about how that is, at this point, contributing actually a majority of the inflation across a variety of categories. And we've also covered here specifically with regard to rent that there is a nationwide epidemic of basically rent collusion, where they're using these algorithmic programs to squeeze every penny that they possibly can out of renters and colluding amongst a lot of large landlords in order to do so. There's actually legal action being taken against this in both federal and state courts. So, there are supply chain issues. Each of these categories has their own specific story, but corporate profiteering is a big part of this, which was basically put off the table to talk about for a long time. Joe Biden has started to talk a little bit about the corporate part of this, but has done basically nothing about it. As you mentioned, he was asked yesterday about these inflation numbers. Let's take a listen to his response.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last month, you predicted the Federal Reserve would cut interest rates thanks to falling inflation. But today, data showed that inflation rose more than expected for the third straight month. So how concerned are you about the fight against inflation stalling? And do you stand by your prediction for a rate cut?
Well, I do stand by my prediction that before the year is out to be a rate cut. This may delay it a month or so. I'm not sure of that. We don't know what the Fed is going to do for certain. But look, we have dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down to close to 3%. We're in a situation where we're better situated than we were when we took office, where inflation was skyrocketing. And we have a plan to deal with it, whereas my opposition talks about two things. They just want to cut taxes for the wealthy and raise taxes on other people. And so I think they have no plan. Our plan is one I think is still sustainable.
I mean, this is obviously one of the biggest political risks for the Biden campaign. He's got a number of political problems ahead of him. Don't get me wrong, his age being one of them, his unconditional support for Israel being another one of them. But consistently, voters say the economy, inflation, even as consumer sentiment has improved a little bit, and people's sense of the economy has improved a little bit, and we did get a really good jobs report last week, and unemployment is low. I mean, there are some things that they can point to, but this is just a major sore spot. I saw numbers last week, Emily. The same groceries, for the same basket of groceries, this year over last year, you have to spend $445 more a month. I mean, that's astronomical.
Yeah,
the amount of money that represents for ordinary people is huge. That is huge.
It's huge. And I continue to think the strategy of acting as though, your eyes are lying to you, your bank account is lying to you. I think that is a really, really big error for the Biden campaign. And it doesn't mean that, like, from a political strategy perspective where you're spinning and, you're doing the usual BS. I'm not saying Biden should walk out and take credit for it, though I would give him a lot of the blame. But I'm not saying that's what he has to do. He should, though, empathize with people because people are really hurting, and it has happened. It has transpired under his watch, and there's a whole lot more to this than people just not remembering how good they have it under Joe Biden or not understanding.
Yes.
And that continues to be the line from the White House. Why aren't you reading Paul Krugman? Why aren't you accepting what Paul Krugman says about the economy? It's like, actually, why aren't you accepting what's happening to normal people when they go to get their groceries?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was really underscored by a noteworthy moment from a top Biden surrogate and ally, Jim Clyburn. He was on MSNBC. And his whole argument was very similar to what you're saying. It's like, people just don't understand how great things are. And he's going on and on, we brought inflation down. And MSNBC literally has to break into his comments with a CNBC reporter with these numbers on inflation being hotter than expected, just coming across at that moment. So let's take a look at that awkward exchange.
Is that inflation today is about 40% of what it was when Joe Biden took office. And so the inflation rates are down and people's incomes are up. Not what they may hear on social media. One of the focus group people talked about social media and the misrepresentation, disinformation, all of those things are out there. And that's the battle that we have to fight. And we've got to do a better job of fighting it more effectively.
So I'll validate that. I think the disinformation out there is distorting the entire process. I think social media doesn't help. But there's also a lack of validation that these voters feel. And I'm going to bring in Andrew Ross Sorkin right now because we just got breaking news. The consumer price index increased at a faster than expected pace last month, a signal that inflation remains stubbornly high.
And this has been their line, blaming disinformation for what people are able to experience in their own lives. I mean, $445 more per month for your groceries. Now we have actually, in some instances, wages surpassing the inflation rate, but you may have already been behind from previous inflation in the past that your wages didn't catch up to. Not to mention, the course of the Biden administration, we've seen the social safety net that was erected during the COVID era, all of that being stripped away. So the previous supports you had, and not only in terms of direct checks, also in terms of the child tax credit and other programs, that's gone. Inflation remains high, and they're blaming disinformation for people not understanding what they're experiencing in their own lives.
And this seems to be the strategy that they're sticking with. I mean, we're like a couple of months into this strategy now, and you can see it in real time fail for Jim Clyburn on Morning Joe. On Morning Joe, of all places, where inflation to them basically means nothing. It means like maybe their intern gets them, a medium coffee instead of a large coffee, but not even that.
Yeah.
When they go run out to get their coffee. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And the problem is going to be also they continue to deflect to different Trump culture wars things. Not I don't mean culture war in terms of abortion, but like these questions of like Donald Trump is just, you guys forget how bad he is. Like the Trump amnesia line they try to build into this inflation thing. You don't remember how bad the economy was under Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera. You don't remember how bad it was with COVID. The View was talking a couple of weeks ago about how Ana Navarro she felt like she couldn't even play Words with Friends. She was constantly so stressed out during the Trump administration. She really said that. She's back to playing Words with Friends now. So that's good news. But they keep deflecting to that stuff.
Ana Navarro can play Words with Friends.
But it's like, it's their crutch. It's their crutch. It's like Donald Trump was horrible, so they don't have to talk in substantive terms about the economy. They don't understand that it's actually probably less risky for them to empathize with people who are struggling right now.
That's right. And there's a way you could approach this. I don't know that Joe Biden is personally capable of this, but there's plenty of evidence out there, like I said, that a significant chunk of this pain and this inflation is directly because of price gouging and corporate profiteering. So when you get a report like this, don't try to dismiss it. Don't try to underplay it. Don't try to convince people that their lives are different than their lives actually are. Come out hot with rage at the corporations who are jacking up prices, who are making fat profits, many of these companies making the biggest profit margins they've ever made before. Come out hot and filled with righteous anger at those individuals and at those corporations that are causing pain for American consumers. And you know what? It's not just theater, because the reality of it is the presidential bully pulpit does still mean something. When Joe Biden did a little bit of conversation about meat packing plants and the way that they were price gouging, it actually had an impact. You could see the way that they altered their behavior in real time because they felt that scrutiny from a presidential level, and they know, hey, this guy's got a lot of power. He could mess with us here, from an antitrust perspective in other ways.
It's bad publicity too.
Yeah, and it's bad publicity, and corporations are very skittish about that sort of scrutiny. And so they actually improved what they were doing, and it had an impact. But instead, you see this, instinct constantly to gaslight and insist that the problem is actually just the media is not explaining to you, or you're too dumb to understand what the reality of the economy is. No, the economy is, it's complex for some people, sure. If you're an older person who has a home and a lot of savings, you're probably doing okay, even though, for you, inflation is a problem too. If you're a younger person, you're trying to get a home, that is wildly out of reach. You got student debt hanging over your head. you've got some real problems here, and it's not imaginary, and it's not because you don't understand what's going on. Something Sagar and I have been talking about here is there's this curious inversion in at least some of the polling where older Americans who had been more consistently Republican, Joe Biden is actually doing a bit better with them.
Yeah.
And younger Americans, he's falling off with. Now, part of that, I think, is Israel-Gaza, no doubt, but that doesn't explain Trump picking up support there. And I do think that the difference in the experience of the economy for the young versus the older generations is a big part of that story of what's going on in some of the polling that's come out.
And my best guess as to why he's not addressing the price gouging as much as he could be, just from a sheer political standpoint, is that it broaches this issue of the legislation he's passed, the super high spending, and he can defend. But that's what's interesting, because he did that in big ribbon cutting ceremonies with these bills. He's very proud of these bills. It's like this is what he wants to run on, but he's afraid to talk about them. It's a total catch-22, and it's an unfortunate situation for him because he's afraid to talk about it, to validate that inflation is not going down, what did he say, dramatically decreased?
Yeah.
He's afraid to talk about that instead of just coming out and saying, I passed necessary spending, which I don't agree with, but he could certainly agree with that. Say, I passed necessary spending, and then corporations jumped on the bandwagon and are trying to take advantage of us trying to repair the country. But they don't even want to talk about that because they don't want to validate that people are really still feeling inflation.
Yeah, I think the fact, too, that analysis about corporate profiteering came from the left, there's just constant, like, anything the left says or argues, the mainstream of the Democratic Party feels the need to be against.
The other way, yeah.
I mean, really, since like the Clinton era, that is their natural instinct. That is certainly Joe Biden's natural instinct. And there's more indications now. There's an interview, I don't know if you saw this recently, with Ron Klain, who is Biden's original chief of staff, when you were getting some more progressive things out of this administration before he left. And one of the things he was saying to him is like, Jesus, Biden loves talking about these frickin' bridges. But you know what? People aren't like experiencing a bridge at the grocery store. They are experiencing their grocery prices being higher than they used to be. So we need to focus a bit more on that. And he is absolutely correct. And I don't think it's a mistake that since Klain left, not that things were perfect when he was there, but there's really no affirmative economic agenda whatsoever. It's more of just like a hope and a prayer that things are getting better and will continue to get better, which, you know, as evidenced by this report, hope is not a strategy. Let's put this next piece up on the screen from Heather Long. I mentioned this before, but I really need to do some more digging, or we need to get an expert on to explain to me what is going on here, because this car insurance and car repair spike is really wild. She points out over 90% of U.S. households own a car. Vehicle insurance is up 22.2% in the past year. That's the largest jump since 1976. Vehicle repair is up 11.6%. One theory I saw floated, Emily, but I don't know if this is, you know, this has backing or not, but it sounds kind of logical, is during COVID, people were driving a lot less. There was a kind of a bonus on car insurance came down because it was, you know, less risky. Car insurers were having to put out less money because people were just driving less. Presumably, there's a similar dynamic going on with repairs. Because people were driving less, there were less auto repairs. So now that you have a spike in driving, a spike in auto repairs, perhaps that's what's driving this huge jump. But that is a massive expense for a lot of American households, 90% of whom, as she points out, own a car. So this really matters.
Yeah, 90% of American households own a car, but it's always worth remembering, actually, that journalists are disproportionately clustered in New York City and Washington, D.C. And listen, I didn't have a car for a really long time here because I used public transit. I walked, and that's similar to a lot of journalists. So this is a big blind spot for the media. It always has been. Gas prices.
That's true.
Some journalists do have cars. Many journalists do have cars, but a lot of them actually just don't even, these are not things that even register for them because they're taking the subway or they're walking. And they're, you know, I think that's why we're sitting here, Krystal, looking at these huge spikes and being like, wait, what? Because if there were more media attention paid to this over the course of the last couple of years, I think we would all have a better understanding of what was going on. But it's always been a blind spot for the press.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And also, you know, many of whom want to help the Biden administration and don't want to talk about this too much and are subject to this same, you know, shaming over quote unquote disinformation around the economy. So let's put this last piece up on the screen from the New York Times. Their headline, inflation was hotter than expected in March. Unwelcome news for the Fed. They dig into this prospect I mentioned earlier. You know, there's all these indicators of like, oh, what does Wall Street think that the Fed is going to do? And Wall Street was thinking there was a decent chance you were going to get a rate cut here coming up. That is basically off the table now. You know, it is most likely that rates will hold steady. I saw Larry Summers out there, for what it's worth, saying, you know, we have to now expect that it's possible we could even go back to rate increases. This has a lot of political implications, although it's kind of, you know, it's a dual-edged sword. So on the one hand, when you get rate cuts, you get you can have a hotter economy. You also have lower mortgage interest rates, which really follow very closely what the Fed is doing. So those are good things. On the other hand, it can contribute to inflation. So that's the argument in favor of the continued, trajectory or increasing the rates. So, and if this comes into the fall and the Fed is changing rates, that can have also political implications, something that Donald Trump is keenly aware of and has already been discussing. So in any case, the fact that this inflation report came in hotter than expected, probably changing the Fed's plans and definitely taking a rate cut off the table for now.
And puncturing the narrative bubble of a lot of experts over the last several months. Not
True.
that will come as a surprise to anybody.
Yeah,
but,
that's true, though. There was a lot of like, oh, we did it, soft landing, no...
Mission accomplished.
There was a lot of mission accomplished going on in the mainstream discourse, and I think this is a real reality check moment for them. Hey, guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.